I thought, this is really complicated. We have people that are adjusting to work from home. The frontline medical staff have a whole different kind of stress on them. The people have been fired. Restaurants are closed. There's no one way the work disruption has impacted. There's no one answer from a faith point of view. So I started working with a number of pastors to try to come up with a model to see, could we find any patterns in the way the work disruption was impacting people? Because if we could find patterns, maybe we could find ways to help people think through the lens of the Christian based slightly differently, maybe hear the hope of the gospel slightly differently, depending on the patterns. And so it's evolved over the course of the 2 months. It's ended up being organically translated into 4 different languages. I think it's in Spanish, Hungarian, Japanese, and Chinese. And people have given other ideas along the way. So the purpose is to help, let me share the slides now and we'll go through it. So really the purpose is to help church, ministry, and marketplace leaders plan how to care for people that are experiencing work disruption in the crisis. And so I'm going to state the obvious just to get us all on the same page. COVID's radically impacting work environments. Pastors are unsure how to pastor the complexity of this. The disruption is highlighting varying spiritual needs and physical needs, as well as temptations. And this model suggests that it's one's economic flexibility or agency or power versus the type of disruption that impact what the needs are. And I'll go through that in more detail. And so then the hope of the gospel is unilateral, but we can apply it differently depending on the needs. And then hopefully the Holy Spirit then allows for an outward orientation so that no matter what our work disruption is, we can see others' work disruption as well and find ways that through our gifts or our circumstances, we can be outwardly oriented. So this is just a schematic to show you where we're going. So first I'm going to go over the model, then I'm going to share how the model relates to physical needs, spiritual needs, temptations, then how it relates to the hope of the gospel, and then how it relates to nuance, to outward love. And again, these slides are all going to be available for you, as is a workbook where you can work through worksheets in your own context to think through how this impacts. So here's the base of the model. The base of the model has an x-axis and a y-axis, and we're really going to think about different types of work disruption in quadrants. And so if the x-axis refers to the day-to-day work in one's normal work environment pre-COVID and refers to the level of change being experienced. So how radical is the change happening in your work environment because of the situation? And then the y-axis refers to a combination of the amount of socioeconomic margin one has to live a sustenance lifestyle, or the amount of power or decision-making one has in their work environment. And a lot of times those are determined by their position, how senior are they, their education, do they have social capital, how much financial capital do they have. And so if you start to look at these things, we're going to build out quadrants, 4 different quadrants, and how the work disruption might be impacting them differently. So if you think about work being ignited, you might think about, so I don't know if this happened in India, but in the United States, there was a toilet paper shortage. And so there was a whole lot of pressure to run the toilet paper manufacturing lines 24/7, every shift. And so the work was the same. It's still the same to make toilet paper, but they were running at a much faster rate. So that would be ignited work. A lot of our restaurants closed, completely halted work. And so that's how you think about the work disruption axis. So I'm going to take us to the quadrant explanation. And so we would posit or give the position that there's kind of 4 key quadrants that we can look at. And so let's just go through them one at a time. So if someone's work has been significantly ignited, increased, demand is increased, but it's roughly the same kind of work, and they're high on the socioeconomic flexibility and agency side of things, they end up in this quadrant. And I would say the theme of this quadrant is that they are overwhelmed and trying to keep up. And so we had a problem in the United States keeping the grocery store shelves stocked. There was a run on the food. And so the grocery store chain managers, the high managers, were trying to figure out, how do we keep up? How do we keep up? The management of Zoom. Who was on Zoom calls 10 hours a day 2 months ago? Not many of us. Zoom management has been radically working very quickly to try to increase their capacity. Amazon. I don't know what your equivalent of Amazon would be called, but all the home delivery service, the managers of the home delivery companies, they're overwhelmed in trying to keep up. We have I would say the nurses would fall into this. Same work, but very intense, needing to do longer shifts. If you, and they're moving down towards this way, but we can talk about that in a moment. If you think about still high on the socioeconomic flexibility and kind of power scale, but the work has been completely halted or radically upended. It's having to be done totally differently. And of course, this is a continuum, but let's think down here. Think about the restaurant owners. So their doors shut immediately. They have mortgages to pay. They have to figure out how to get a revenue line with no ability to open the doors. So they're thinking through, okay, how can we do delivery? In the United States, there's been a lot of laws changed to allow alcohol sales, which a lot of restaurants here depend on, to now be delivered. Nobody could deliver alcohol before this. Hospital administrators would be an example in the United States because all the non-COVID based work was canceled. And so now that's canceling most of their revenues. And so they're trying to figure out how to care for all these very sick patients, but not make their regular money. So I would say my job falls in this category. I'm having to do my job very differently. We did a lot of in-person trainings. We're having to figure out how to take all our trainings online. And so the theme of this is strategizing with an unclear path. Strategizing with an unclear path. These people tend to know what needs to be done. There's just not enough hours in the day. These people are like, we have to replan. We have to do things totally differently. Then if you move down this curve on socioeconomic flexibility, but you're still on the work is either halted or being done radically differently, the theme of this group is impoverished and trying to survive. So imagine all maybe the dishwashers or the wait staff of the restaurants. In our country, they've all been furloughed or fired. Hotel cleaning staff, they've all been laid off. The hotels don't have any business. And so these are people that were already on the margin, and now the work has been completely halted. So they're trying to survive. If you move over here, the delivery workers, the manufacturing workers for the masks, for the antibacterial soap, for the toilet paper, these people don't have much agency in their work. Some would say the nurses belong down here too. These people don't have much agency in their work. They don't have much say on when they work, when they don't work. They don't have much say on the working conditions. They're being asked to work much longer hours and a lot of pressure to go faster. And so I would say the theme of this quadrant is exploited and trying to progress. And so the arrows suggest that people are moving between quadrants as the pandemic unfolds. And so you can start to think about your workplaces, your congregations, your constituencies, and you can start to think about where were people before COVID and where are they moving? Are they moving from here to here? Are they moving from here to here? Are they moving from here over to here? And you can start to think about, plan for how you're giving pastoral care, whether you're a pastor or not, how you're caring for people. And is this a one-on-one interaction or is this a group interaction? And do I need to think about a collective group of people and where they're moving, or just an individual and where they're moving? And then you can start to think through what might the most logical spiritual needs be based on these categories. And so in the exhausted and trying to keep up group, I've listed several. I'll just kind of go over one or two. Chances are their biggest spiritual need is avoiding this self-reliant, this is on me. I must control the outcome. It's all on me. And this kind of walking away from a belief in God's sovereignty and that they're in partnership with God, but more like, I gotta solve this. I gotta do it. So, which leads to a lot of anxiety, lack of Sabbath. In time, they probably need to look at some of their idolatry about their identity being in work. But right now, there's probably this overwhelmed of it's all on me. In this group is probably pretty fearful of failing and perhaps starting to move down this curve. And so this group needs to know, I'm okay if I fail. My identity is not all in my work. Anxiety relief, again, Sabbath, probably overworking, and really probably being realizing how much of their identity is in their work and is in their success. And the thought of not figuring it out and failing is probably pretty overwhelming if their business goes under, things like that. This group, these people are the ones getting exploited, perhaps by this group. These need to believe that God is just, God sees them, anxiety again. And this group down here, they need to believe that God cares about their well-being and that God sees them. These are justice issues down here. These are more idolatry issues. These are more justice issues. So those are the spiritual needs. Now you can also think about physical needs. And so up here, a lot of needs around energy, just physical energy, rest, childcare, if people's schools are still closed. I don't know what the Indian school schedule is and if your schools are still closed. Ours are still closed. They're closed for the summer. They may not reopen in the fall. So a major childcare issue. These folks over here, chances are they're being exposed to the virus more readily than these people. So they've got the need for actual physical health, not being exposed to the virus. But down here is where the physical needs are real significant. These people are moving this way very quickly, and food and shelter is becoming a problem. Where, getting evicted from their leases, where are they going to lay their heads? Almost 20% of the United States has fallen into unemployment right now. And before COVID, it was less than 3%. So that's how significant the shift has been. And so then you can think about the probable temptations. And so, if you have a self-reliance issue, you think you are God, and you start to use people you wouldn't say that, but that's kind of what's going on at the heart level. And then you start using people transactionally for success, and you're really prone to pride and greed. Same thing over here, with the exception of because you're so scared of failing, you're actually, you're also very vulnerable to great despair. Both these are very vulnerable to greed. If you go down here, a lot of potential for complete faith abandonment, some confusion between righteous and unrighteous anger, and extreme cynicism. So we have a lot of opportunity for people below the line to have a great deal of disdain for people above the line, because we have a lot of opportunity for people above the line to abuse people below the line, especially the ones down here, to kind of extort them for success or to relieve pressure on themselves. So I'm going through this pretty quickly so we can have a rich discussion about it. But this is really, I think, an important part. And the important part is if we really can think through this and what's going on with an individual, then suddenly we can present the gospel differently based on where they are. So I was meeting with a pastor in New York City last week, and he pastors in the boroughs, and he's had 13 deaths from COVID in his one church. He said, so his folks tend to be on the margins. He is African American and Dominican. He's a Dominican Black, so he's both in the Hispanic population and the Black population in the United States. So there tend to be a lot of people on the economic margins in his church where he's pastoring. And he said he went into a meeting, and he had somebody in every single quadrant in the meeting, and his elders, his church leaders, but he didn't realize that, and they didn't realize that. And so he was trying to soothe them with one message of the gospel, and it only worked for one person because the other people needed to hear something different. So this group needs to hear God is in charge. It is not all on you. We're working for Christ. We are partners with Christ. God prepared our work beforehand. He has got this figured out. This group needs to hear something different, slightly and slightly similar. This group needs to hear that Jesus draws us to him in his failure and that we're righteous through Christ, not our work. It's okay. It's going to be okay. Down here, need to hear some messaging around suffering. God makes good from suffering. We serve a suffering Savior. God cares about justice for the needy. In the new heaven and earth, all sad things come untrue. So if you start to think about if you're pastoring a church or if you're working in a company and you lead a company, you can start to think about where are the people that I want to care for, and what is going to soothe their pain point. Which part of the gospel is an entry to their heart right now? Because if you come to this person with God is in charge, they're like, okay, well, if God's in charge, I am hungry and I have nowhere to live. What do I do about that? If you come to this person about, we serve a suffering Savior, these people are feeling like they are God. So you can see how the hope of the gospel can really hit people's heart differently depending on their pain point. And then this part's quite important as well, and it's working with groups of people to think through, based on where you are, what gift can you give another quadrant? Everybody has a gift to give. So these folks down here, which may have the least material gifts, they can be our model of self-reliance on God, not self. They can show the people above the line, look what it looks like to rely on God. They can offer childcare to people over here. They can show opportunity to really help re-employ people down here. They have an opportunity to help them find jobs. They have an opportunity to perhaps do gleaning, leaving work they could do for themselves and give it to others that are below the line. They can offer fair treatment. So there's all kinds of ways to strategically think about groups of people, thinking through how to give gifts back into the community based on this. And so we'll move into a time of discussion, but I just want to let you all know that in the materials, you'll find a workbook that goes back over this, and it has questions for practitioners around self-reflection, organization reflection, and then pragmatic. What do I need to do differently on Monday because of this? How do I need to plan my time, my organization, what I'm doing differently on Monday? And then it lays out helping you plot your constituents, where they're moving, what their physical and spiritual needs for your context are, what their temptations are. And so you can actually plan out the hope of the gospel. And then there's also questions to help you meet with people one-on-one to ask the right questions to find the pain point, to figure out where are they in the quadrant. And you can do that in individual meetings, or you can do that in group surveys. So that ultimately you can plan for how to communicate the hope of the gospel in the context, and you can plan for the outward love for others in the context. So let's go back up to the model. We'll just put that up on the screen. And I turn it back over to you, Akshay.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Shavi. That's really helpful. And I think in so many ways, it's a map for trying to figure out what we're feeling, what's going on, and what we need. So we're really thankful to you for your time and helping us with that. Like I said earlier, I'm going to just post the link in the chat so you can get access to this tool and the workbook that goes with it. So you can click that and you'll have access to that. Why don't I at this time invite Thomas Abraham to kind of respond to the presentation, and then we can take it from there. Oh, 1 second. So I have to unmute you. Yeah, I think you're on.
Yeah, so thanks, Missy, for that very interesting perspective, and thanks, Akshay, for this opportunity. So what I wanted to do the next few minutes is really, look at, take some examples of some of the constituents from an Indian perspective. And Missy has already laid out, the entire flow, the spiritual peace, physical needs, and the hope of the gospel. But what I wanted to really talk about was how can some of these constituents actually start recovering, given the fact that there is so much of disruption that has actually happened. And to really assist me in that, I was reading a report from Deloitte the other day, and they really spoke about how a typical crisis plays out in 3 time frames. The first is really the response, and in which really, organizations, institutions, and individuals respond to the situation and manage continuity. So, for instance, for individuals, it was more about staying at home and making sure that they only venture out for essential services. And for organizations, it was mostly work from home and building the necessary infrastructure to ensure that business continuity actually happened. And pretty much organizations have been through that phase. A lot of individuals are probably still in that phase. The second phase, defined is that of what we call as recover, which is that how do institutions and organizations really learn, and how do they emerge from this? And it's quite possible that a lot of institutions and organizations will not survive, but there would be some who would emerge stronger, right? And there could be individuals as well who have moved into this particular phase. And the third phase is really what we call as thrive, which is that how do organizations and institutions, prepare for, and how do they start shaping the next normal? Because, this crisis has also given us the biggest opportunity for innovation. And we're going to see that. I mean, I think once this crisis, and we're already starting to see that, and we're going to see a huge amount of innovation come out of this crisis. So let me, take some very specific examples. So if you look at the lower left quadrant, which is really the impoverished and trying to survive category, typically from an Indian context, you would have, the construction worker, the factory worker, farm labor, and so on. And these people have actually, these people are have sort of been largely in urban areas, and they've lost their jobs. And, there is no earning from them. Earning for them, number one, and secondly, they've had the fear that they would, get an infection, and they would have no one to care for them. So they sort of decided to migrate back to their hometowns and home villages, and many of them have done it. Some of them are still in the process of doing that. Now, what is happening in the bargain is that a lot of the infection now has moved with them, with many of them, to the villages, right? So over the next few months, many of the villages themselves may not be that safe. Okay, and number one. Number two, the villages may not have the necessary healthcare infrastructure as well to cope with it. So that's really the first thing. The second thing is that, there are no jobs in the villages when they go back home. So they would at some point in time need to go back to areas where jobs would be available. So that's a significant dilemma, and all the other concepts that Missy spoke about are extremely relevant here. But what I wanted to do is to really outline what it would take for them to recover, so that we have a sense for what can actually happen. And I really spoke about innovation. So one of the things that's now happening is that there are a lot of innovations coming in, which are now going to be aggregating supply from these catchment areas, as we call it, and feeding them into demand areas, which is factory sites, construction sites, which are now getting unlocked. So as we move into the unlocked phase, economic activity is going to begin. But the big challenge is, how do you bring back people? So there is obviously the government's involved to make sure that the borders are open and so on. But we are already starting to see some innovative platforms driven both through technology as well as a lot of on-ground support, which is aggregating supply, making sure that the right skill sets of the people available on the supply side are then, can be made available for, where the demand actually exists. So for instance, just to give an example, there was a recent newspaper report which said that the Border Roads Organization is going to restart construction activity. And the Jharkhand state has already said that they are willing to provide 15,000 construction workers who can go on site, provided they're going to be safe, and so on and so forth. So really the point really is that we're going to start seeing a lot of innovation, and which is going to help us and help these constituents recover from the situation they are in. The other example that I wanted to give was the top left quadrant, which is really strategizing with unclear path. And Missy rightly spoke about restaurant owners and about how many of them have been shut down for 3 months. Many of them may not really recover. They may close shop. But I think we've already started seeing innovations. And for instance, in the US, one of the biggest innovations and one of the biggest businesses now that has happened is really curbside pickup, right? So there are a lot of technologies that have come in place. There are new ways and means in which restaurants have started to provide that kind of service so that they can actually survive. So curbside pickup has become a big business now. And even in India, we're going to see that while there is going to be a phase where people will lose their jobs, and therefore they need support as per the spiritual, physical, and the hope of the gospel, the entire flow. But what we will also see is that we will see bigger players come in the next 6 months who will consolidate these businesses, because there is still plenty of investment happening. It's not that the investment has dried up. So we're going to see very interesting new restaurant business models emerging. We're going to see far more active delivery businesses, curbside takeaway businesses, and so on also happening. There's going to be more of cloud kitchens emerging. So I think while we are faced with some significant crisis, I think the thought that I want to leave behind is that we're going to see plenty of innovation, which is going to help really provide that outward love, as Missy had pointed out in one of her slides, which is going to help people recover. Yeah, so thanks, Akshay. With that, let me hand it over back to you.
Yeah, thanks so much. So let me just open it up to any questions that anybody has at this point. So I think we can just have it in a way where you can text the question in the chat either publicly, or you can text it to me privately, and then we can post. And if you have a question specifically for Missy or for Thomas, you can do that, and you can post that in the chat. Yeah, so let me give a minute or two for that. But Missy, do you want to respond to anything that Thomas was saying, and do you have any thoughts about that, or while we wait for a question to come in?
I think you talked about the going back to the rural areas, and is this, we have that going on in the US too, but it's less to rural areas. It's just back from the major urban centers to the smaller urban centers or to the suburbs. And I've been following a researcher in Houston who's doing a lot of research on what is going to happen to urban centers after this pandemic. Are urban centers going to be radically changed for a long period of time, or is it going to just be a short time? And he combined 10 different urban researchers' points of view. And to save you time from reading the article, they don't know. I mean, there's some that say nobody's ever coming back to the cities. It's only going to be the people stuck in the cities. And some say this is a blip in time and they'll be back in the city in a month, So but they are all thinking about, for so long we've heard of the urbanization of the globe, and how many cities of 20 million or more are expanding, and some are suggesting that it will reverse course.
Yeah.
I would be interested if people wanted to put into the comment bar which quadrant they feel like they are in. Do they relate at all to the quadrants, if you're comfortable?
Yeah, that'd be a good thing to do. So, I mean, I can tell you, I feel like I'm in the top left quadrant. I think churches in general have been in that quadrant. This thing was completely brand new. We've never been through anything like this. So, and I think before COVID-19 happened, a meeting on a Zoom call was kind of a strange thing, right? Why would anyone meet on a Zoom call? Why don't we just meet face to face? But when this thing happened, suddenly Zoom exploded, and now I think everyone's on Zoom the whole week through. So, but we really felt like as a church, we were strategizing with an unclear path, and there was a lot of uncertainty. And I think in the first couple of weeks, I felt more anxious than I needed to. I felt more fearful than I needed to about how things were going to pan out. And I wasn't getting any rest. I wasn't getting any time to myself. So I needed to hear that message that God is on his throne, that he's the head of the church and that he will build his church. So I think that was a very, so I'm definitely in the top left-hand quadrant. But this whole map, I mean, this tool was very helpful because it also, I mean, it helps me as a pastor just figure out that different people need to hear different messages, you know, and it's not one message doesn't work for everyone.
Mm-hmm. I've had several pastors tell me that they have, spent most of their career, pastoring people at this part of the socioeconomic spectrum, and that very quickly they're gotten down to here. They're not gonna, probably end up homeless and destitute with no food, but they've never, ever experienced financial hardship, perhaps. Yeah. And one pastor was talking to me about pastoring someone who's never experienced financial hardship at all is very, very different than pastoring people who don't have financial hardship. And then the pastors were also talking to me about it's very different way to pastor someone who dips down into this quadrant versus somebody who maybe lives down here all the time. Mm-hmm. Someone who dips down here has a real opportunity to pop back up pretty easily, perhaps because of education or family ties or whatever, that people who live down here systemically, not so much. And so I think another caution, especially for those pastoring, is people that pop down can think, oh gosh, I now completely empathize with people that live on the margins, whereas they didn't really see the systemic problems keeping people on the margins because they were able to pop back up because they didn't have the systemic limitations. So it's something to watch out for as well.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Yeah, I think, just to add on there, what we've seen is that, in India now, job losses are mounting. And it's not just the migrant labor and so on and so forth who are getting impacted, but even people who were doing really well and who probably were earning well, but have suddenly lost their jobs, and they have sitting on huge financial commitments. They've taken big loans. They're educating maybe kids in expensive places. So, and they are now facing a crisis where A, they can't get a job for a while, and B, they have perhaps just gone into a shell. And this is where I just want to touch upon the fact that there's been a huge impact on overall, mental health of people across the board. And it's not just people in, who are impoverished, but across the board. And I think I think that's a big thing. And so we're going to see that. So the church has a big role there to play, because mental health is a big area where one can focus on, but it also opens the overall opportunity across the board for businesses to emerge in this space. So I think mental wellness and spiritual wellness and so on is going to be a big industry by itself, across the board for sure.
Faith and work. I think there's an opportunity for faith and work to become more prevalent across the Christian religion. And so I would say 90% of people have been in churches that don't help them link. 90% of Christians have been attending churches that do not help them understand the link between what they're hearing on Sundays to what they're doing at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. And really, it's, you know, we hear the gospel most, and we're reminded of the gospel most through our pain points. And this is where there's incredible pain points right now, is in people's work. And so to help people understand that the gospel is for all of life, and to help them, I think this is an incredible opportunity as an on-ramp to really help people understand the wholeness of the gospel through looking at it through the work lens. And then if people understand the wholeness of the gospel at their work, then it becomes an incredible missional opportunity for the church and for the city and for New Delhi to think about, how can I love people through banking? How can I love people through working for a software company? How can I love people, places, and things through working for a software company, or working for a customer service phone bank, or working for a restaurant, and really help work be understood as an off-ramp to missional living.
Yeah, I mean, I was just recently thinking about, you know, because nowadays when my wife and I, we have a little room outside our home where we go to work. So we take turns, and every time we go out, we tell our daughter, she's just 2 years old, but we tell her that we're going to work. And I was just imagining when we get older, when she gets older, and we try to tell her, you know, why we work, you know. And I think about it in India, people tell their kids, we work because this is how you make money. You have to make money, you know. What else will pay for all this stuff, you know? And or you tell your kids, you know, we have to survive, you know, we've got to do this and you've got to endure it. But I think I feel like when my daughter asks me, you know, why do you work? I think we've got to be able to tell her that, you know, we work because our work is a way in which God loves people. You know, whatever we do is the way that God loves people, and we can't be self-centered. We want to love people, and work is one of the ways we love people. And I think unless you have meaning in what you do, you don't enjoy it. You know, and this idea that God is loving people through our work, it can make any work meaningful. So I think that's just, yeah.
So I was recently talking to a man whose job it is to paint the inside of buildings. And he said, you know, and he manages some of the other painters. And he said, you know, it's just really hard to help painters understand why their work matters to God. And so we started talking about it. And by the end of the conversation, he was going back to say to the painters, we're creating a space that things are going to happen in. Hard conversations are going to happen in this space. Beautiful conversations are going to happen in this space. We can make this space more beautiful to enhance community, to enhance beautiful conversation. And so suddenly he was able to link what he was doing to how it could make the world, you know, more reflective of God's character. I would say in my personal journey, one of my biggest ahas, and it happened, I mean, it did not happen until I was like 45 years old, was that I was created to work. And I missed that. I missed that theology, sat in the, you know, churches my whole life and missed it. I thought work was part of the fall. I thought work was just the toil that we were given because of the fall, and that in the new heaven and earth, we would just be sitting on clouds playing harps. And then I learned better theology, that I was actually created for work, and that Genesis 1, the very first page of the Bible, shows God working and creating. And the pattern it shows is that he takes chaos and he brings structure, and then he calls it good. And he takes chaos again, he brings structure. He says it is good. And then on the sixth time, he says it's very good, when he makes man. And if you think about all of our jobs, whether we are working in a software company, whether we are doing spreadsheets, whether we are pastoring, whether we are changing the diaper of a child, whether we are sweeping a street, it follows that pattern. It's chaos. We're trying to bring structure, and we're trying to call it good for the sake of God. And so if you that pattern, I have not found a job yet that pattern doesn't work for. So that was just so encouraging to me to realize God created me to work. Oh my gosh, I'm not doing this to just have self-fulfillment or make money. I'm doing this for him. And that his pattern, take chaos, bring structure, call it good. His pattern works in banking. It works in insurance. It works in sweeping floors. It works in restaurants. It works in parenting. Super encouraging to me.
Yeah, and I think one other area where we're going to see a lot of disruption, and which would be in the area of leadership itself. Because historically, we've seen that leaders have a certain persona. They're seeing as being very result oriented and doing what it takes, and so on and so forth. And then many of them have been very inward looking, a lot of leaders, and very successful ones as well. But I think it's so refreshing now to hear people talk about, the fact that the leader should have compassion with courage. Leaders should be vulnerable, apart from, of course, being agile and adaptable and so on and so forth. So there are a number of these new characteristics which are also emerging, and these are very biblical characteristics as well. I think that's a big transformation that's happening. So actually, there's a lot of discussions and debates happening whether we're going to start seeing in the corporate world a lot of leadership changes, because many people who have been primed in a certain way or conditioned in a certain way all their life, they would find it very difficult to change. So it's also about how can people really make the change. I mean, one is of course leaders, the other is also individuals, because the way I'm looking at from an employer and employee perspective is that the responsibility has shifted from the employer to the employee now, in the sense that earlier you relied on your employer for everything, right? For your promotions and things of that kind, and learning and everything. But now I think the transformation is that it has shifted to the individual. So it's up to the individual to be able to learn, to be able to pick up new skills, to be able to contribute, to be really part of that transformation that can happen. And I think there was a comment that I saw on the chat which said that this is a great opportunity for transforming the nation. And I truly believe it, because there's a complete reset which is happening. And, there is, it's all back to square one. So I think, we need to figure out ways in which as individuals, we can contribute to that actual, transformation, so I'm sort of just reminded of what someone referred to as, the parable of the golfer, the other day, where, if you play a game of golf, you tee off, and then the ball lands maybe on the fairway or in the rough or in the bunker. And then, it's about thinking what you do now rather than what has happened in the past. So the past has impacted you in several ways, but you got to think about what you will do now in terms of a strategy. What club will you use? What's going to be a stance? And what's going to be the velocity of the shot, and so on and so forth. So I think everything is shifting to the individual as well, and the individual obviously needs to have his faith, his trust, and all those parameters fully sorted as well. So I think that's another observation that I'm actually seeing.
Yeah. So we have one question, and I just want to take the opportunity also to kind of invite any more questions. If you do have them, please feel free to post them in the chat. You can either post them publicly or text them privately to me, and I can pose the question. So here's a question. How do you work through uncertainties and finding it difficult to be motivated to work towards something that could change in the near future? So I'll invite either of you to speak into that. Missy, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I think it's an amazing question. And I can also send you all an email that was written by our department on mental health at this send it, Akshay, to you afterwards, and you can
Sure.
put it out, or when Thomas is talking, I'll try to get it and put it in the chat message. But I guess what the underlying question is just how unsettling uncertainty is and lack of control is. And so I think that going back and focusing on God's sovereignty and God being in charge and God's faithfulness is my antidote to that discomfort. And so I know Psalm 75 is a particularly good one for remembering that God is in charge. Psalm 11 is also a particularly good one for God being in charge. And then I also just think of the example of Jesus and just how he, excuse me, I have something in my throat, how he ebbed and flowed his ministry to keep himself motivated. So if you can imagine, like, he feels like he's down here to save the entire world and people are just flocking around him, touching his cloak, being healed. Yet he withdrew very periodically to recharge and to pray and to be back in it again tomorrow. And so I think that the rhythms of personal renewal are more important now than ever, because I think that our motivation has to come through our faith more than through our given happiness at the role with as much disruption, uncertainty, and ambiguity. Most people are not comfortable in ambiguity. There are some that thrive on it, but most people are very uncomfortable in ambiguity. And so the antidote to that is to believe that God is bigger than this. God cares for it. He knows how this is going to turn out. He has prepared my work ahead of me, which is Ephesians chapter 2. So while you're answering, Thomas, I'm going to go find this mental health article during the COVID crisis and put it in the chat bar.
Yeah, so I think, so Akshay, from, maybe looking at it from a, practical standpoint as well.
Sure.
My question really is that, we've all had a rest period as well, last 2 to 3 months, there's been a lot of work, but it's also been a period of rest for a lot of people. So my question is that, what are the new skills that you have picked up during that lockdown phase? And there's been a great opportunity for each of us to enhance our skills. There's so much of material available. I mean, even Harvard and Wharton were giving out free courses, for people to do. So I think the key is that, are we taking ownership of building some of those new skills and getting prepared for the future? That's the first thing. The second thing is that, and this is a trend that's going to happen worldwide, is that as unemployment rises, and there is going to be huge, and we're already seeing that, as unemployment rises, so will self-employment. So self-employment will also rise at a great pace, right? And this is going to throw out multiple things. One is that it is going to make, we're going to see more and more entrepreneurs come out of this, right? Because unemployment is there, you got to employ yourself. So you got to then start thinking aloud about what does it take for you to become an entrepreneur, number one. And the second thing that's going to happen is that we're going to see a huge explosion of what we call as the gig workforce, So you have to look at what are the skills that you have, what are the new skills that you have built. And even if you do not have a job, full-time job, do you have the capability, or are you able to sort of be a gig worker? And organizations are now wanting to look at gig workers, people who bring very special skills to the table, who can work on projects. So I think the paradigm of a job is going to change as well. Okay, it's no longer going to be someone's desire, to have a full-time job. It is going to be the desire of people to do things that they enjoy and they like and they contribute and which can be meaningful to them. In fact, there's been some research which has been done, which says that the most satisfied employees are those who have more than one job. They have a full-time job and they have a gig. And the gig worker actually will add a lot of value, because what they do is that they're not constrained by the limitations of an organization. Okay, their experience is, is sort of varied because they work with different organizations, pick up different skills. So they bring far more value, when you really look at it. So I think the answer is that, look, we need to look within ourselves to say, what have we done in the last 3 months to pick up new skills? And have we really equipped ourselves to be a gig worker of the future as well?
Yeah, that's great. That's good for both the heart and the hands, right? So that's it's really great. And so if you missed it, Missy's just posted the article on mental health during the COVID crisis article, which you can access, and I'll text it to anyone in Redeemer, particularly since we're all in a WhatsApp group. If there's any other questions, I want to invite you to just go ahead and take the chance to post in the public chat, and or to me privately, and I can ask the question. But Missy, I just wanted to go back to something you said earlier, and it's a thought that came up when you were talking about work being meaningful. Because I think sometimes when we think of work, we confuse it with a job, right? And you also mentioned that changing diapers has that same structure of chaos and structure, and then you're trying to create something good to the glory of God. So do you want to speak into that a little bit, like how work and jobs relate to each other, and how work maybe is something larger than just a job?
Sure. So I have that on a slide somewhere else, a particular definition of work, which has to do with just productivity, basically, of some sort. It can be mental productivity, it could be actual productivity, but work is basically anything that's not rest and not leisure. And so we know what rest is. Sleep's the obvious version of rest, but there's other versions of rest too. Put up your feet and watch some Netflix or something, or leisure. For me, leisure, I like running and hiking. I like going to restaurants for my leisure. If I was a runner, though, trying to qualify for the Olympics, that wouldn't be leisure anymore. That would be work. And so I think for me, the easiest way to think about what is work, it's anything that's not rest or leisure. So for me, work is unloading the dishwasher. I'm lucky to have a dishwasher, but it's work to unload it. I do not like it. I do not like folding my laundry. And so a lot of people get a lot of thought around, what is my calling? What's God calling me to do? And I think it's puts a lot of stress on people, perhaps unnecessarily. It'd actually be more simple to say, you have to have a caller to have a calling. And so God is calling you to himself. He's calling you to Jesus. And then he gives you secondary callings, which may change over the course of your time, and based on your skills and based on your abilities and based on your circumstances. And so my call has been right now is to actual vocational paid ministry. My call for a long time was to the corporate world. I've had a call to be a parent. I have 3 children age 18 to 22. All those are parts of my work. I'm called to do I sit on the board of a refugee healthcare agency. That's part of my work. That's part of my calling. And so I think work is the big word, job is the smaller word for the paid portion of it. And that God calls us to work in a variety of ways. So you can be out of work and God can call you to work. Your job search is work. How you're helping your church or community is work. Taking care of your child is work. Is that what you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, that's great. I think that clarifies it in no uncertain terms, and it's a beautiful thing. I mean, to know that that God gives meaning to pretty much everything we do, and you don't have to kind of fall into because in our culture, right from the time that you hit the 10th standard, right, you're on track for performance, right? Until 9th standard, you're kind of cruising, but 10th standard, I mean, I don't know what it's like anymore, but when we were in the 10th standard, the board exam was the big exam, because that decides what course you do in the 11th standard. And 11th standard, you cruise a little bit again, but in the 12th standard, you have the big board exam again, and that decides your college. And then your college decides where you're going to work, and from that point on, you're on this performance treadmill. And I think it's really liberating to know as a Christian, as a believer, that that work is so much more than that treadmill and that job cycle, because that's important, but work is so much bigger than that.
Well, and I would go so far to say that the achievement treadmill for the people that achieve a lot is probably one of the biggest things that make it hard for you to stay close to God, because it's a sense of I'm doing this on my own. And I've often referred to it as the most socially acceptable addiction, to just achieve more, achieve more, achieve more. Yeah.
All right. We have 10 minutes left. So I just want to quickly remind you of some of the resources that we've already shared. So there's, let me just post it again so that it's front and center. So this link that I've just posted, that's the link to the slide and the workbook that Missy shared with us earlier. And that's available for you to download and work through yourself. I also want to just share something that Thomas Abraham has been working on. He's just developed and he's moderating a show called The Future of Work. And you can find that on YouTube. And it's basically helping people prepare for the new world workspace. So let me just post that. Let me post a link to the first episode of that series. That's in the chat as well. And yeah, I think that, and I think just above that is the link that Missy just posted about mental health during the COVID crisis article. And if you had registered for this on the type form, then I'm going to have your email address, so I'm going to be able to send you the recording of this webinar. So in case you missed anything or you had got disconnected in the middle, you can watch this again. All right, there's 10 minutes left, and we've got one question. So let's close with this question, and let me read it out to you. So it says, work timings have increased since lockdown, and it feels like companies are taking advantage of their staff, and most have no option but to stick it out in this uncertain job climate. How do you still stay joyful and optimistic when it feels like you're being exploited? Missy, do you want to go first?
I don't know, and I haven't had a lot of experience feeling exploited in the workplace, and so I want to be really careful to qualify my comments with that. However, recently I was just about a year ago, incredibly misunderstood in the workplace. And just horrifically, I won't tell the whole story, but it occurred to me in the middle of the day one day, after being deeply grieved about this situation, that Jesus went to the cross being greatly misunderstood. And so I actually think we could think about that from the exploitation as well. Jesus went to the cross being exploited. Paul sat in jail and was exploited. Stephen was stoned. And so I just think we have to look at examples of keeping the grand narrative in mind of, all sad things are going to come untrue. Now that's a heart level answer. I then also think there is a hand level answer where are we called to speak to darkness and exploitation, and where are we called to be silent? That's a bit of a discernment issue. You can see that that's playing out in the United States quite largely right now on our racial justice issues that way overdue, way too much complicity on the justice issues. So I think there's a both and looking at the example of exploitation, as well as when is it the right thing to do? Do I have the agency? Can I align with anyone with the agency to try to combat the exploitation?
Yeah. Yeah, perhaps I can just, look at it and, I sort of echo that sentiment that, that people are actually overwhelmed. It's a fact today that most employees are overwhelmed because of this, the work from home. Now work from home has had its advantages for employees because, the commutes have been significant. So a lot of people have spent 2 to 3 hours commuting up and down from work, and they've saved it, and therefore, they can consume that time in activities which can help in rest and refreshing themselves and pursuing a hobby and staying with the family and so on and so forth. But I think one of the reasons why this people have got overwhelmed is because organizations this has happened overnight. Okay, so organizations have struggled to therefore deal with how do they manage their employees, because in India, managers have always micromanaged. Micromanagement has been the key, in a lot of companies, that you always, looking over the shoulders of your employees, and you could do that because they were in a physical workspace. Now that in 24 hours, the world changed, right? So supervisors, so I think this is a challenge for people who supervise employees, right? So supervisors have really struggled to figure out how can they, still keep track of their employees. So I think because in the physical world, where physical office world, you could just walk around and you could call people into a room and have a chat, right? You could talk about one issue. But what I'm hearing from a lot of people, and I deal with a lot of companies, is that today, if they have to talk to 5 people, then they have to send them an invite, get them onto Zoom, and people may be busy somewhere. So very often, to deal with one issue, the supervisor has to make maybe 3 or 4 calls. Earlier, the supervisor could make 1 call and deal with the entire issue. But today, he or she needs to make 3 or 4 calls. Okay, so that's a practical situation. So and they are coming to grips with it. So a lot of organizations, and I think this will settle after a while, because a lot of organizations have taken cognizance of it, and they're sort of figuring out how do we get our supervisors to be more structured in the way they work. So the people are now putting in some norms, saying that, look, we will have morning meetings, we will have a noon meeting, we will have an evening meeting, and then we won't really interrupt people, in between. Number one. Number two, I think people are also putting in now norms in place where they're saying that, look, hey, we won't have calls beyond 6 o'clock. Okay, right? But because the reality is that productivity has gone up tremendously thanks to work from home, but people have been overworked. That's also happened. So so now a lot of people are also saying, and in the US or in Europe, I think one of the countries has already said that now we're going to move to a 4-day week, right? So 3 days are going to be off. So I think organizations are coming to grips with this. It's a learning process. So while I would be a little hesitant to use the word exploitation, I would say that it's really employees getting overwhelmed and supervisors not having the skills and the tools and the ability to deal with their with their teams, which is actually making all this happen. And therefore, so I think it's a process. I think things will change, and as we move more and more into a blended model, there will be more factors like a trust. So for example, it was heresy to say that somebody could work from home once upon a time, right? You would insist that you have to come at 9, you have to punch in something, and you can leave at 6, right? If you don't come at 9, then the supervisor would glare at you, right? But now everybody works from home. So now people have to learn to trust people, right? You've got to learn to trust your employees. And that's a big change, right? It's a 24-hour shift, right? It's happening in the mindset. So I think we've got to give people some time to adjust to the new normal, or the next normal as they call it. And I think things will settle down as people, as some kind of a rhythm sets in.
Great. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us, Missy, in your morning, and Thomas this evening. And thank you all of you who were able to participate and listen in. It's everyone's on Zoom, and it's a Friday night, so we really appreciate your willingness to participate today. So we'll close the meeting there. And just to remind you again, we've shared the resources in the chat, so I hope you have them. But thank you so much again, and I'm going to close the meeting now. Thank you so much. Thanks, Missy, and thanks, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.